So I'm going to show you how to use the cloth modifier to actually make something kind of like a tent. So I went in and I opened up my old beams, right? So there's a separate tutorial about going through and building an object like this, but what you're building it with is items that you went through and unwrapped. And so these three objects have all been unwrapped to one texture. And that would not be the one, that would be the gladius that's hanging out there. This would be the one. This is the texture that's applied to these three wooden beams. And so if I take these, do File, Save, Selected, I can go in and I'll call it Vendor 01 and save. So let's go ahead and we'll open up that scene. I'm going to say don't save. Vendor 01. Hey, there's my beams. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to clone these over. We'll set this at about 100. Clone it again. Over at negative 100. How tall are these guys? If I go in here and select a vert, I don't remember. 2 meters. All right, so they could probably be a little bit taller. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this to, I'm going to scale them based off of their pivot point center down here at the bottom, but I'm going to use squash and stretch because I want them to be thinner but also taller. All right, so that's what I'm going to go with. Those are going to be, this is going to be the height of my little vendor stall here. And then I'm going to take these guys and from the side, I'm just going to kind of move them over. And I'm going to change the scale to regular scale at this point and just make these ones in the back a little bit smaller. Okay. So now I want to make like a little tent out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a plane and from above here, I'm just going to come in and drop a plane over the top of this. Now, I tested this out before I actually started recording the tutorial. And so some of my settings are not the default settings, such as the number of segments in a plane. Let's take this guy, move him around a little bit. Okay. Make sure he's centered at 0. Perfect. All right, so he is going to be my vendor stall, but one thing I want to do is I want to make him a little bit longer, like this. And I'm going to change my move to local and move him down here a little bit. There we go. I want to make him longer. All right. So let's take a look here. All right, kind of got this guy. He's here. He's going to hang out. This part's going to drop down the front. This part's going to drop the back. It's all going to dip in the middle. All right, perfect. So let's kind of move him in. So at the moment, he's just going to be clipping through here. We can always go back and we're going to adjust the shape of our poles later. But for now, I have this cloth. I'm going to call this Tarp _ HP. All right, so let's put a cloth modifier on here. Okay, so I'm going to go into group, and what I want to do, now you can see I've added a lot of vertices to this model, and that's because it's going to deform based on the number of vertices it has. And what I'm doing when I go into group here is I'm going through and I'm selecting vertices that are not going to deform. These are going to be locked in place. All right. So there's my group of vertices. I'm going to make a group out of them. I'm going to call it mounting because that's where they're going to be mounted to the beams. All right. Now over here, I have a list of my groups. It says unassigned, so I'm going to click node, and I need to attach it to something. So let's go over here to helpers. And I'm going to go to create. I'm just going to make a dummy object here. And then I can come back. So helpers, a dummy. A dummy is just a node out in space. So I'm going to come over here to cloth, group, and I'm going to say node. I have it attached. I can come over and select the dummy. Okay, so now I can get out of that sub-object. Now I'm at cloth, and so I want to start my simulation earlier at like -100, so it gives it enough time to kind of sort its way out. I'm going to go into object properties on the cloth, select it, and say cloth, and select a preset like burlap, and hit OK. And then just because it can be a little finicky, I'll go back in, cloth, burlap. Okay. And now I'm going to save my scene because it might crash. All right, let's see what happens. I'm going to hit simulate. And now those vertex points that I said I made a group and I grouped them to this node. So now they're going to sit and everything else is going to move except for what's been attached to this node. And so you can see it's kind of dropping down and giving the feel of cloth. It's getting that shape now. This is a lot of polygons, and so you're not going to take this and just throw this directly into a game engine. What you can do is you can utilize this to create another version of it. That would be your low poly version. That would be the one you would unwrap, and then you can bake the high poly detail onto your low poly, meaning all the little wrinkles that are on here you could bake into the texture maps for your low poly. And then you could attach that to the beams, and you'd have this nice little stall that you could kind of drop in and add a little character to your scene. And what's great about it is running based off of actual physics, and so you can see it kind of drooping down here as the cloth hangs. And there's a lot of different factors in the object properties that you can search. There's lots of things for the friction, static friction, how much it will interpenetrate an object. I'm not worried about the poles. What I'm going to do is once I get the cloth looking the way that I want it and I'm really happy with it, I'm going to take the poles and I'm going to actually adjust their size a little bit more so that they're not clipping through the cloth here at all. So, but yeah, this is a way to use cloth to create a simulation, to utilize the simulation technology in order to create an asset. So let's take a look at this. You know, if I hit play, you'll see it kind of hanging there. Of course, I don't want it animating. All I'm looking for is just like the actual cloth just kind of hanging there. So now I could take my beams and I could make them just a little bit thinner and a little bit shorter so that they're kind of sitting underneath there. Same with the ones in the front. I could do the same thing. Just kind of scale them in, and then I'm going to shrink them down a little bit. All right. So there we go. Now there's a little bit of fine-tuning work to do in there. This guy though, he's got the cloth simulation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click and say collapse to make all that permanent. And I'm just going to change this here to an edit poly. All right. So now, looks like I may need to just pull out some of these verts a little bit. Why don't we grab this, grab this loop here. And I'm going to turn on my soft selection. I want to grab the verts that make it up. I'll just need to turn that down a little bit. And really, all I really need to do is just grab like these guys right up here at the top. That's really all I really need to get. Like if I grab this one guy right here, I pull this out. There you go. It's just a subtle little shift like that, and now it's not clipping through there anymore. All right. Again, I can go in and I can just make these poles thinner, as well as if I took them both and did, I need to rotate this one so that they don't have the same wooden smear in exactly the same spot, which makes it look super fake. So why don't we just rotate this guy 180 degrees, and this guy I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, and this guy I'm going to rotate -90 degrees so that all four of them are kind of facing a different direction. There we go. And now I could take these two and just put a FFD modifier on them. That's freeform deformation. If I grab the back end of it, I just kind of drag that down. Maybe move this one over a little bit. There we go. Instant not clipping. See how magical that is. And I convert that to an edit poly. Alright, I could do the same thing with these guys back here. Grab the two of them, FFD, and I could actually just grab those, drag them up a little bit, and then just grab the bottom end and lower that down slightly. Alright, convert that to an edit poly. This guy is clipping through a bit more extreme back here, so why don't we just go in and we'll just increase. Whoa, fallout kind of jumped up there a bit. There we go. Put that at like 100. And just kind of pull them out. 50. Select this vert. Alright. There we go. Okay, so here's kind of my simple tarp. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna clone this as a copy. I'm gonna call it tarp underscore OP. Okay. Let's hide unselected and I'm gonna save. Okay, so I'm gonna go through here and do a quick optimization pass. I want to try and retain as much of the form of this as possible. To do kind of a quick first pass to optimize this down, I could go in and grab an edge and say edit. Nope. Actually, I want modify selection. I'm going to grab dot ring, which will grab every other ring, and I could just remove loop and just go the opposite direction. Let's modify selection, dot ring, remove loop. You see it's still retaining its shape. All right, and still the verts are still deforming. I could probably do that a couple more times, coming through and just doing the dot ring. Modify selection, remove, and we'll just come over here to our polygon counter. Let's get that open so that we can see how my polys this is. All right, 1250. That's pretty good. We could maybe rip a couple more out of here. Let's come in here, do modify selection, dot ring, and I kind of want to preserve the outer edges here and just get rid of these guys. There we go. Here in the back, I might get rid of a little bit more. There you go. So it's still got more of that kind of erratic shape going. But yeah, I think we might need to throw an extra ring back in there. So I used Flow Connect. So I grabbed the ring and I hit Flow Connect from up under modeling loops. And that, you see how that kind of rounds out the geo. I'm just going to pull that up a little bit more and throw one more in there so it's not quite as edgy right in that spot. There we go. So yeah, I went through and ripped out a bunch of polys, but then I went back in. I added just a little bit here and there just to kind of keep a little bit of the subtle curves. Where'd I land? Yeah, see? I'm under 900. Perfect. Let's grab this guy. Put a... I'm going to make sure I got one smoothing group. It's perfect. If I look at my unwrap UVW, because it is a... Yeah, it's your standard mesh there. It's a big old plane, and the plane by default is a 0:1 aspect ratio. And when I make the texture, I think I'll make it 2:1. So, all right, so I'm going to take this guy here, and I'm going to File, Export, Selected. I'm going to go to that same folder for my post. I'm going to call this tarp underscore LP. And then unhide all, hide this guy, and then grab my high poly and say File, Export, Export Selected, Tarp, HP, and save that off. Alright, we'll just hit Save. I'm going to pause this while I load up Substance Painter. Alright, so here I am in Painter. I'm going to come up and say File, New, And I'm going to go to my desktop, to my posts, grab my tarp little poly and say OK. And there it is. Now you'll notice you don't see anything. That's because the polygons, it's a plane, it's only one-sided. So we can set up our material to actually be two-sided. That won't be a problem for us. All right, and we'll just come over here to our textures. We're going to bake mesh maps. And before we do that, we're going to cancel out, because I'm going to make this a little bit longer than it is taller. So we're going to make it half as wide as it is tall. Bake mesh maps, same thing here, 1024. And then we'll select our eye poly and say open. And now I'm just going to click bake to bake out that texture. And you can see, look at that, we instantly, you can see the normals come in, all that detail from those curves comes in looking really nice on top of our material. All right, so there we go. Now we got that sitting on top of it. I can come over here to the side and I can throw in a material on top of it. Like if I wanted to put this knit sweater fabric on it, let's say. Well, that's cool. The problem with it is that it needs to be tiled more, so we'd have to adjust the scale. And there we go. So now we could use this, and we could probably find something that's a little bit more cloth-like. Let's see what I got under my smart materials here. If we want, we could get fancy, and on top of it, we could throw like a little... I'm looking for dirt. So if we want to make it dirty, bam, it's dirty. Of course, we could change that to be something else. We can make it a subtle dirt. It doesn't have to be quite as dirty as it is. So let's just go in here and just dial that down a little bit. There we go. Just a little bit of dirt. All right. At this point, I'm just going to save it. File. I'm going to just export out my textures here to the desktop, to my same post folder. Export that. All right, so if I come into Max now, I'm going to hide my high poly here. I'll open up my material editor and slap a material on this guy. Assign material, and I'm going to bring in a texture. I'm going to bring in my tarp. There it is. There's the base color in there, and I can go into the material and tell it to be two-sided. Now, there is a normal. We could plug the normal in. You know, there's really no point in here, though. We could plug it in inside of you could throw a normal bump on and show it. What I do want to show you in here, though, is the way this is going. Let's take a quick look here. Unwrap UVW, open the UV editor, go to Polygon and click on it. All right, so this is the bottom of the texture here. This is the top. So I want to make a special map here, and that map is called a opacity map. So I went online, I found an image here of kind of like a torn, frayed edge. So let's go ahead and let's open up our post image here. So minimize this. Let's go to our desktop, grab our post, and we're going to open up our tarp. Open with Photoshop. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a separate map here. So I'm going to do File, Save As. I'm going to call it tarp _ O for opacity, and I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. Okay. Now it says tarp O. So then I'm going to take this texture. I'm going to do Select All, Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to move it over here. I'm just going to drag it over so it matches that entire width. All right. So when you're making a opacity map, all you want is black and white information. And so that means anything that's black is going to be invisible. And so I'm just going to kind of come in here and I want to isolate out where this sort of torn, frayed edge is on here. I want to make all the rest of it down here just be completely black. Because I want it to have kind of this erratic sort of edge that's along the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of real quick go through and do this. There we go. And so if I come in here, I'm just going to push the darks a little bit and push the lights in the opposite direction. I'm going to use my magic wand to kind of fill all those lights in and just make them pure white. Alright, so now use just my marquee select. Alright, that's pretty good. It's okay if I got a little bit coming through here. Let's take this whole thing and just make it completely grayscale. Alright, and now I'm going to save this again. File, save. And now inside of Max, I'm going to go ahead and say, here's my post. I'm going to drag my Tarp opacity in there. I'm just going to plug that into the opacity. And so now you can see that it has this look of being a torn fabric there. What you're seeing right here is the texture itself is wrapping around to the other side. So there are settings where you can go into a texture. You can tell it not to tile, and that will help sometimes. 3ds Max does not have necessarily the best render in the window, so you could just take your textures and you could just kind of take them, maybe bring them in a little bit. You don't have to worry about the texture wrap then. There you go. So now the cloth has that nice little kind of torn edge. And the great thing is, since they are kind of far apart, if we just clone this to a new layer, and do edit, transform, rotate 180 degrees. I'll just set this to multiply. So now it's got tears on the top and the bottom. So, and we can just save my PSD. I'm actually going to save this as a smaller file. I'm going to save this as a PNG. Save. Okay. And then if I come into Max, there you go. It's already looking at that texture. So you could take this further. You could, of course, take these objects and continue to adjust their size so that they fit a little bit nicer inside there. You could add additional posts for support going around it. You could attach them all together. Oops, let's set that to view. There we go. You could put additional supports holding up if you want to build some additional supplies. Like you could maybe even put your weapon rack underneath it if you didn't want it to get caught in the rain. So, but there you go. That's one way you can use cloth to make video game assets.